Aurora Dawn Benton. My company is Astrapto. Astrapto means to illuminate, and our mission is shedding light on social and environmental issues in hospitality, travel, and events. So if you are an event professional and interested in learning more about sustainability, I encourage you to check out the EIC's online Sustainable Event Professional Certificate course. I am biased, I did create this course, but it's like this, a bunch of stakeholders got together to create this. It's very comprehensive. I highly encourage you to look at that. So I'm here today to talk about food waste, but I do a bunch of other stuff related to sustainability. So if you're interested in any of those other topics, we can chat about those another time. But today, let's talk about food waste. So I've been doing food waste work for a few years, and I got the opportunity last year to do my third project with World Wildlife Fund. So why would World Wildlife Fund care about food waste? Well, because the clear cutting of land and all of the things related to food waste is very detrimental to biodiversity. So hence, World Wildlife Fund really cares about this. So my first major food waste project that I ever did was in Baltimore for World Wildlife Fund. Then I did one in Dallas for World Wildlife Fund. And this year I've been working on the West Coast. And so the organization that actually funded this work is called the Pacific Coast Collaborative, or the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment. And it is an organization that has jurisdictions up and down the West Coast and includes cities of Vancouver, Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, Oakland, and Los Angeles. We had participants from all of those cities in this program I'm going to tell you about. And here in Seattle, we had two, the Fairmont Olympic, thank you for showing up and representing, and the Hilton at SeaTac also participated. We had 5 hotels and 2 convention centers as part of this pilot. And it ran for, well, it's one of those things where it's like, initially it was like, oh, we're going to do like this 5-6 month project. It took us like, I don't know, I think it took us 4 or 5 months just to get it off the ground, because last year was the worst time to try to recruit hotels and venues to do work like this. The labor shortages, the craziness, the unpredictability of all of it, crazy. But nonetheless, we got our participants, and we are just wrapping up, getting some results and doing focus groups and everything. So I've been presenting snippets of this work over recent months, but you're my first official audience giving the full presentation, the full scope of everything. And in a few weeks, they're going to be publishing some case studies that we're writing, and a lot more is going to come out of this. And how many in the room are planners? Okay. Excellent. So I'm trying to get some funding and some things going where I can do a project that includes the planner side as well, so that we can sort of do like a collaboration, helping planners with their side of the food waste reduction, and the suppliers as well. Mostly my clients tend to be suppliers, but I can see from both perspectives. So the pilot itself, we recruited some properties, we did some discovery work, kind of what are you doing, and we did some focus groups, talk a little bit about that. Then I came on site, workshop training, then we pestered the hotels, as some people in the room can attest, and say, are you doing the work? Are you doing the changes? Are you making the changes? And then we had some surveys and some results. So that's what I will share with you today. This is the food waste reduction framework that's used by the Environmental Protection Agency. It's kind of an adaptation, a simplification of that one. And other global organizations and governments use this framework to think about food waste reduction. In my years of doing food waste reduction training, I find everywhere I go, everyone's very focused at the bottom of that pyramid and very excited about their work they're doing. We compost, yay, us. That's what I see a lot of. But unfortunately, where we really need to be focusing our efforts is like further up this pyramid. So at the bottom, for diversion, we have things like compost and digesters. This is a good thing. I am not saying that we shouldn't be composting, because I don't know about you, but I don't eat eggshells and pineapple skins. So we got to do something with those things, right? Sometimes you burn food. You got to do something with that. So we have this as a solution when needed. However, the EPA came out in 2021 and said for municipalities, governments, et cetera, compost is no longer part of how you meet your food waste reduction goal. Now, it's better to shift from the landfill into compost, but you don't get to put a bunch of stuff in compost and be like, yay us. You've got to work up this pyramid, okay? Now, the good thing about this is one of the hotels that I worked with, they had a digester machine. So as soon as I start talking to them, I heard what I always hear with these things, like, we've got the digester machine. I won't say the brand, but like, we got the digester machine. Oh, we have the digester machine. I was really excited about the digester machine. So I taught them about this, right? And of course, the rest of literally a 4 to 7 hour training course that they went through. And here's what one of them said in the focus group afterwards. For the last few years, the digester literally meant we don't have food waste because we have a digester. But now the mindset is that that's just one part of the solution. It's there to catch what we didn't catch in the forefront. And that's been a game changer. That's a mindset game changer for this property. That's one of my favorite outcomes of this, because it really opens people's eyes to see that like the compost and the digester, great, yes, but they are not the full solution. So we've got that. Then we have recovery for either people or animals. This is also something that we need to spend more time focusing on. I find that pretty much across the board, there's never 100% of anything, but almost across the board, every convention center I work with or go to has a donation program, and every hotel I go to or work with does not have a donation program. The hotel industry really is behind in this particular one, but this was not a key focus of our work. It did play a role, and we will talk a little bit about that. And I'm happy to say that the hotels that did participate now see this as a more important and urgent thing, and they're working on it actively. And then you've got reuse and repurpose. So the employee dining room is sort of the catch-all for like, oh, well, our employees are eating it, right? So again, kind of like composting, like, yeah, but how much are you throwing away in the employee dining room? We probably should look at that. But at least it's getting eaten, ideally. And so this, of course, is very true in the hotel space, that most of these, most of the food does go to the EDR. And then there's also, like, you have kitchen, the stuff in the kitchen, like carrot tops and celery leaves and things like that. You can use those to make stocks and soups and stuff. So that's the reuse and repurpose. All of that is treatment. That is what you do once you have generated waste. The focus of this work was prevention. And prevention is very hard because we first want to fix what we see. And we see all this waste, we see things, we want to fix it, so we tend to think about, like, how can we donate all the food we had left over? How can we make sure, are we doing the best we can with composting? But prevention requires a completely different way of looking at things. And it's also hard because it's like measuring something that never happened. Right? Like with your health, right? We all know what we need to do to prevent heart disease and high cholesterol. Do we think about it every single day? We probably think about it when we get our blood work done once or twice a year, right? So similarly with food waste, we have to show those numbers and make people aware. So the themes that came out of this study are these, and these are the things I'm going to go through today. And just to say that, I designed the pilot, so I did what I wanted. When World Wildlife Fund came to me and said, well, what should we do? We've got the funds to do something. I'm like, I know exactly what I want to do. And so a lot of what you're going to hear today is, by design, I was trying to force an issue. I was trying to force everybody to see what I've been seeing for years. And then some of it was stuff that, like, I didn't even think about this, but because the way I do the workshops and we have this really interactivity, focus groups and stuff, I learned from the pilot participants and came up with all these new great things that I can now take out into the industry and to share with you as well. So first and foremost, awareness. Now you may be thinking like awareness as in how much percentage of food do we waste and what's the hunger rate and things like that. I do cover those things in food waste reduction training, but what I'm talking about is a different kind of awareness. And I think that this is particularly important in a place like Seattle. What I find, especially working on the West Coast, is that when you go in and you start talking about like, hey, I've got free consulting and training to offer you in food waste reduction. No, we're good. We're so sustainable. We're already super sustainable. We do this and we do this. We're good. You get a lot of that, right? So kudos to those who are willing to say, maybe we can learn a little bit from this. Because part of the awareness is recognizing the gap between where you think you are and where you really are, or the gap between where you really are and where you really should be aiming to be, not the current place you think you should aim to be. So let's look at some examples of that. First of all, if you've been in the industry for a long time, it's just something you get used to seeing, right? So you wake up to the fact that you get used to it for so long and you get to the point that you take it as a normal daily routine. And a lot of the people that I spoke with have been in the industry for a very long time, especially banquet operational people. And then you realize this isn't normal. This is not normal. This is not okay. There's actually something we can do about this. Got a lot of comments from people who had been working in the industry a long time saying things like this. Then also, not a surprise, the awareness of how important it is to engage everyone in a particular way. When we change things, they think it's about fees, efficiency, cost savings. But when you explain this and the why and the purpose behind it, I was genuinely surprised at how many individuals felt engaged. This was from a director of banquets. I saw commitment rather than compliance. Now, what's the difference in your organizations and when your teams, when they are committed versus complying? It's a game changer. It's a game changer in customer experience. It's a game changer in your culture. It's a game changer in performance. So it's very important to get everyone involved. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The most of what I was really trying to do is break this mindset of like, well, we've always done it this way. Well, we've always served this for breakfast. Well, we've always structured our events this way. We've always done a box lunch. And all the things that we say that we always do. It's just how we've always done it. And you know how, have you ever been a passenger in a car on a route that you drive every day? And suddenly when you're the passenger, you're like, is that how it's always been there? This is what we're doing, you know? And I tell people a lot of times, look, when we're talking about sustainability, and I come in and do training, it's gonna feel a little bit like you've been sitting in a dark room and I come in and turn on the floodlights, right? Because suddenly you're gonna see things, and you're gonna see things that you don't wanna see. So when you're working with your organization, you might need to use a dimmer switch sometimes. You might need to slowly introduce some of these changes and what needs to be done differently. But I was coming in and flipping on the lights as much as I possibly could. One of the things that I found, you know, I'd been seeing this for a while and it really kind of hit me in this last year in this pilot, is I would go into these places and I would say, because I mostly do event-related stuff, right? So it's different when you're working with a restaurant or in-room dining, some of those things that are a little more consistent. But with events, every day is different, right? So I would go into places and I would point out a practice that should change. And inevitably, someone would say, well, we don't do that here. And almost always inevitably, it's the executive chef. Oh, no, my people know better. We don't do that. But what I found is almost every time they would tell me something they don't do, I would see it being done in the property while I was there. Oftentimes at the lunch they served at the training. Oh, you don't do that? Huh, that's interesting because there it is right there on the buffet, right? And so it turns out like, oh, well, that's because the planner asked. Or, oh, there's someone new in the kitchen. Oh, there's always a reason. And so the exception is actually the rule. These things you claim, oh, well, we never pre-pour beverages. I'm looking at a table of pre-poured beverages right now. Like, so you can't just get credit for this. You can't just be like, we don't pre-pour beverages. You should probably count how often you're pre-pouring beverages. You should probably get some data on that and share that with your planners so they understand just how much waste that creates. So there's this exception is the rule. Now, donations. So when it came to awareness around donations, you know, like I said, I really wanted this to be about prevention. And it's funny because the people at World Wildlife Fund, they would constantly be like, so donations, I thought we were going to make this all about prevention. I'm like, yeah, but this is all about culture change. And the way you get into the door to talk about all the rest of this is through the heart. Through the heart. And this is the heart. right? So like I said, only 2 of the participants actually had donation programs. So at one of them, we actually scheduled a tour of the local, this is the Blanchet House in Portland, Oregon. We actually toured it while we were doing the training. And then the next day I had these team leaders stand up and tell the rest of their coworkers what they experienced and saw. Game changer. Total game changer. Then the other convention center we worked with, the Vancouver Convention Center, after the training, I told them, like, hey, you should do what the people in Portland did. They did. They took a whole bunch of staff there, and they were like, it's unbelievable. It's just changed everything about how we view what we're doing. We were already donating, but now, like, the heart behind it, right? And that comment a moment ago about commitment versus compliance, that comes from one of the organizations that did that, because the people can really see how what they're doing makes a difference. The other thing that I found very interesting is that a lot of times the donation is done by 1 or 2 people. Someone on the culinary team and someone who works kind of like the docks, storage kind of area. They kind of handle it all. They pack up the food, they call the people, it's all, and so in their mind, they're like, we're good, this is all great. But the rest of the team is like, but what do you do? I want to know what you do. And I found it very interesting that more of the staff wanted to understand, well, what are the food safety rules? Well, how are you doing this? And I don't know that I have one of the quotes, but one of the properties actually said, we have turned over the donation process entirely to the staff. They get to make the decisions, they get to pack the food, they get to call the donation center. It's all them. It's all changed, right? Versus it just being the leaders. So now the donation piece is also interesting as it relates to spreading awareness to clients, because the donation piece was sort of like, hey, this is a way we can start to have like a safe conversation with planners around excess food and what happens to it, right? Like, we'd rather not have excess food, because as much as it's great to feed the community, that's not really the reason we're in business, but at least it's sort of like a fail-safe if we had that in place. So donations is a way to open the door to planner conversations. Now, when I approached this process, this project, I told the World Wildlife Fund team, I was like, I want to start with the sales and the services people. These people. I want to start with them. And so what happens a lot of times is, well, why do you want to talk to us? Oh, food waste, let me go get the chef. No. It starts with you. It starts with the planning. So I started having conversations around this. Well, what do you tell the planners about food waste? Well, they're not really asking. They're asking general sustainability questions. They don't really ask a lot of detail. So we don't really, we don't have a story really. We don't feel confident and comfortable in telling the story. And so it would be something like this. One of the sales directors, before they would even agree to do this, he was like, can we get on the phone and help me? I need to understand, like, how is this going to help me? What does this have to do with sales? And so we got on the phone. I was like, you know what? You're asking a great question. You should ask that question. And so I was like, before we start, like, can you tell me about your donation program? He had nothing. He was like, oh yeah, well, and he did this. He muddled his way through the answer. And when he was done muddling his way through the answer, he's like, I get it. Neither myself, nobody on my team, we don't have an answer to this question. Turned out that was a hotel. They don't even have a donation program. But here he is just like muddling his way through it, right? So we went from this, before the training, to comments like this. It's made me more confident to talk to my clients. That's been a great benefit, and I look forward to getting more and more information so I can be more proactive with my clients. I've loved to hear the changes in the sales and services teams, in their confidence, in their engagement, their excitement, and their willingness to try to now talk to the clients, which several of you are in the room, you're planners, right? You're the clients. And this is really ultimately going to be a great benefit for planners. Clients have asked for something to put on their event website or social media so they can educate attendees. Makes you look good too, right? When groups come to our city, sustainability is something they want to promote. As show managers, they made the decision to come here, so they want to sell their attendees on why they're here. So a lot of the sales and services teams felt like, I have something tangible to say now. Like before, it was just that sort of like high-level vague thing, but like I actually have an answer to what we're doing now. I've seen it happen so I don't have to kind of muddle my way through something I think we might be doing. I've witnessed it. I feel more comfortable and confident talking about it. Okay, culture and communication. So you know the saying, to a hammer, everything's a nail. To this hammer, everything is culture and communication. It's always all about the culture and communication. So let me start with the bad news. It takes time. It is not a quick thing to do. And another meeting? Yes, another meeting. All of the sites in the focus group mentioned wanting more time to meet together. Right? I mean, can you imagine the answer to this is hold more meetings? That's going to go over well, right? Hold more meetings. The cross-functional communication and teamwork is the game changer here. It really makes such a huge difference. If you don't find the time to meet, you should not expect things to change. You have to find the time to meet. Whatever that looks like, if you prioritize it, you meet about it. Okay, you gotta find the time to meet. You gotta find the time to talk about this stuff. We did a survey and asked a group of staff from each of the participating properties to say, what are the 3 most important things to move this forward? The top answer, conversations in internal meetings. Number 1 answer, conversations in internal meetings. So it's about involving everyone. When I do training, I always have to push hard on this. I want everybody from the dishwasher to the GM in the room. Well, GM meaning for the convention center caterers. It's a little different in a hotel environment, but your F&B director, your banquets team, your retail team, everybody. You need representation from everybody in the room. It makes a difference. So for this particular person, she said this was like a big wow for us. Like everybody's getting it. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's involved with it. And that's what's really going to make a change on the supplier side, but I would say also on the planner side, right? You can't just delegate sustainability to like this one person over here as like a part-time part of their job. You need to integrate sustainability into what everyone on your team is doing. There is a way to integrate some element of sustainability with everyone on the team, and it will make a difference, right? So it's kind of like, what's the saying about like, you know, it's a lighter load if we're all lifting together, right? Okay, shared leadership. I was talking a little bit about this earlier again, like just giving people an opportunity to solve problems. So we would do these interactive activities in the training. And I've been doing these for years, and I always love these moments where someone who's just like really quiet, doesn't really say much, like all of a sudden they've got the answers to everything. They just needed a space to be able to say it. They needed to be able to have a moment where they could be credible and listened to. Okay, I'm not trying to make enemies of any chefs here, but we have to talk about the chef. The chef is obviously a key solution to food waste reduction, right? The chef learns this in school. They command a ton of respect. They are, usually, especially in the kind of venues and places we are, I mean, they're like, they're known and they're good at what they do. They have great intuition. But they are also part of the culture problem because they are, well, first of all, they don't always like me coming in and trying to, they're like, why are you coming in? You're not going to tell me what to do. Like, no, that's not what I'm not here to do that. I'm not here to tell you how to do your job. I'm here to do some other things. You'll see how this works. But unfortunately, what happens is people don't feel that they can share feedback with the culinary team. In some of these trainings, you can visibly see the tension and the separation in the room between the culinary team and others. The way we did this project, the pilot, the sort of lead into it, the focus groups, I asked to do a focus group with the sales and services team, the banquets team, and then a separate interview with the culinary and maybe stewarding. I tried my best to make sure the chef was not in these focus groups because, boy, people will talk. When the chef's not in the room, they have lots to say. But in occasional times when the chef was on the call, changes everything. Everybody shuts down. So like one focus group, the way it worked out, I tried, but they did what they did, so the chef was on the call. And so no one will say anything. I mean, they're all sitting there like, looking at each other, like freaking out. And so finally, I got one person in the room to say something about something she observed, and he shot her down immediately. Now, I come in and do the training. I do the thing that I do. And a couple of days later, about this chef, I got this email. I am not here to tell him what to do. I just made him see something he wasn't willing to see. And once the culinary team is on board and they don't feel threatened, once they're on board with it, it is a game changer. It's easier to go back to the kitchen with feedback, whereas before it would be a little awkward to say you overproduced. We can be more transparent with each other, and they're actually taking our feedback and making adjustments. When you create a culture where people can share these things and you're bringing these things up in meetings and people feel comfortable because we're all working together towards the same goal, something that a few months ago you couldn't even say, right? Just too weird and awkward and scary and all that to say. But now, this cross-functional communication, I'm hearing this is just one quote of like I'm hearing this over and over and over at all these properties, and I just love that. There's a lot of wisdom in the trash. So the stewarding team is another great source of wisdom and knowledge, but they're not always sitting in the BEO meetings or sitting in, menu planning meetings. But if you involve them in these conversations, they see things that others don't see in a way others don't see it, because they see it all piled together at the end of the day in the trash. So in this particular case, somebody from stewarding was like, hey, I noticed that we have these multi-day events. We're serving the same like cookie and donut flavor. By day 2, like everybody's sick of it and nobody's eating it, right? Well, here's what's interesting. It could be that the reason that they did do the same flavor was to try to reduce food waste, right? Like when you marry menus together and you restrict the amount of the diversity of the variety of the ingredients, that can help reduce food waste. But if you don't have the complete conversation and get everyone involved, you might still end up making a lot of waste. So looking in the trash is a really important part of this process. The culture change is not just an internal thing. It's not just the suppliers that need to do all these things I've been talking about. Planners, you have your responsibility as well. And part of that is really about having a dialogue and building trust. Because obviously, you're trying to hit a budget and they're trying to sell food. I mean, that's always part of the power dynamic between a buyer and a supplier. So we're not trying to ask the suppliers to sell less food. In fact, a lot of what I asked them to do was, how can you shift the spend from trash to elevated experiences and elevated ingredients and other things that events need to be great events, but not trash, right? So it does take both sides. So let's talk about presets, planners. A lot of planners want presets. I try to tell them that once people sit down, we can add more salads, but some are set in their ways. We charge per plate and per dessert, so if we don't put them out, it feels like a breach of trust. I could see that. They've paid for them. They want them out. They're protecting their money. They have to justify their budget. Yep, that makes sense. We pieced it out to help budgets. So we started charging this way because we wanted to help the planners with their budgets. But now by doing that, we've put a monetary value on these things, and we might be creating waste because they're seeing it like, I want everything I paid for, right? So one of the things we talked about was to really engage the planner further, earlier in on the donation plan, so that when you have that conversation about the preset salads, you can say, so here's the thing. If we were to, kind of have a couple of reserve tables or 20 reserve tables, depending on how big your event is, we have some reserve tables in the back. We're not going to preset the salads. Here's how long we know it will take us. We can quickly do this. And if you will choose that option, we'll be able to donate 30, 300, whatever the number is, salads to the local community center or the local homeless shelter or whatever, right? So it's not that we don't make the food. The food is yours, the food is there. But if we put it out, it goes to the trash or to compost, depending on the building you're in. If you let us hold it back and care for it, we can instead send it out into the community. That's a different kind of conversation, right? So planners have to be willing to also engage in that conversation and have some trust. So it's hard for our salespeople to be that honest with planners and say, you know what, your group didn't eat the potatoes, they ate the meat. And there's nothing wrong with telling them that, but we think we shouldn't tell them how much was wasted. We're afraid, but we need to be more open about it. It's not that we're withholding anything from them, it just comes down to tougher conversations with the planners. So planners, I would just ask you, when you're engaging in these conversations with your food service providers and your caterers, to have an open mind, have a position of trust, and have a dialogue about how these things impact food waste, right? So, because it's not automatically that they're trying to get one over on you. It could just be that there's this dynamic that no one really wants to bring it up. And if no one's talking about it, right, how can you expect it to be solved? Menus, vessels, and setup. So this was something that I think was kind of like the surprise of this program. Some of this I've been seeing for a few years, but some of it really came up in a great way in the program. So at every single property, it was mentioned that too much choice leads to waste. Right? So I love this top. Before the training, this top line, there are 20 plated dinner options, and my planners aren't going to read past the first 3. Right? After training, we reduced our desserts by a ton. We probably had 3 full pages. Now we're down to 1. I heard this again, almost all the properties. This is a great example of how once the chef is bought in and sees like, oh, I mean, in a lot of cases, I think it was kind of like, wait a minute, we're not hearing that. Where's this feedback? Well, because you're not really somebody who can take feedback. Now, if you're willing to take some feedback, these people have something to say to you, right? Like, please cut the desserts down. Please cut the number of salads down. Please cut these things down. And so there was a lot of menu streamlining across the board, which is really great. I will commend the chefs for being willing to do that. Okay, the dreaded box lunch. So I asked all the people I interviewed at the end, like, what's the wish list, or kind of like the thing that's going to be like the hardest thing to get this to the next level. And at one place, she was like, oh, the boxed lunch. The boxed lunch, I could probably do a whole session on the evils of the boxed lunch. It's challenging because if you have to feed a very large amount of people very quickly, or you're trying to do a to-go meal at the end, then box lunches are a convenient way to do it, but they are so incredibly wasteful, both on a food waste level and a materials waste level. Super, super, super wasteful. Get creative. Ask your team, your supplier team, help me solve the problem of how I feed 5,000 people in 30 minutes. Is this the only way to do it? And at some places, this may be the only way they offer to do it, but there's a lot of creativity and other options out there. Just be open to some other ideas. The menu changes also have to do with like the setups, right? Setups and vessels. So quick changes lead to quick wins. So at one of the centers,
session here, they're talking about sustainability. And I think there's like one more session in one of the rooms. But,
I don't know what, we're all hearing this voice. Okay.
Yeah. Will you be back tomorrow?
Okay, so quick wins equals, quick changes equals quick wins. So one of the things we did right after the training is we reduced the amount of bread per table. And I will say that when I was at the Fairmont here, the day we were doing the training, they were also going to be auditing a lunch and looking at things. And I went in the kitchen and took photos, and they had already reduced the number of bread pieces per table by 2. Immediately, the day of the training, they were like, we can do this. Right? Instantly. So what I love about this is the first night we saved 130 rolls. This is from a different property, but still everybody's kind of catching on to this. It's interesting to see that something that started out as, hey, let's try this for a night, right? Because it feels risky. Like, what if they want more bread? What are we going to do? Right? So it feels a little bit risky, but it started out as like, let's try this thing for one night, see what happens. And now it's just what we do. We serve less bread. Now, a conservative estimate of how much bread this could save, I calculated it, that this would probably save a minimum of 10,000 wasted rolls per year, based on the 130 they saved on just this one event. Crazy, right? Again, prevention. What did we not do that caused waste? Vessels, vessels, vessels. So for a few years now, I've been bringing up this, there's sort of, I have another slide in a moment, you'll see it's kind of a running joke about the vessels, the salad dressing vessels. I'm like, oh my God, these salad dressing vessels. You could bathe a child in that bowl of maple syrup there, right? And so immediately, everyone, when I would show this, where the ketchup is, that was another one of the Fairmont properties we worked with, and we were doing the training, and I was like, took a picture and put it up at the training. They're like, yeah. Like now we see it. We didn't see it before, but now we see it. The vessels. I love the fact that immediately following the training, all of the properties are like, we're already looking into new vessels. We're already right-sizing our vessels. We're ordering new vessels. We're changing the way we serve some of the things. So what happens is a lot of times the chef, when you bring this up, the chef will say, oh, well, my people know how much, how many ounces of salad dressing should go per person. And I'm like, yeah, but, or he'll say, usually the chef will say like, well, I know how much salad dressing per person. And I'm like, yeah, but are you the one filling the bowls? Have you trained your staff? Do they take out a measuring cup or do they just take a bowl and fill it till it looks full? That's what they're doing, right? And so you end up with a service for 20 with a vat of salad dressing. So immediate win was a lot of the properties are now right-sizing their vessels. The prolifically problematic items. So I think a lot of times with food waste, it feels so overwhelming because we've got so many problems to solve. And so throughout this process, it was like, what if we just focused on like the 80-20 rule? What if we just focused on the things that always go to waste? So we did a top 10 exercise at all the properties. Break up in groups and write on a flip chart, what are the top things that are wasted? And then I put them all on a spreadsheet and did, like an analysis. These are the top most wasted items. I mean, is this a surprise? Is anybody in here like, oh, really? Right? You've all seen this. And again, the 80-20 rule, if you just work on these things, you will solve a vast majority of the food waste problem in events. So bread, bagels, pastries, I won't dwell. I think you know the fillers, the cheap food. Volume does not equal value. Volume does not equal value. So quit with the fillers. Okay, fruit. Fruit platters, oh my gosh, fruit platters. Everywhere you go, you see the fruit platter. And everywhere you go, what's the fruit that's most left on the platter? The unripe food, yes, exactly. If you're gonna serve fruit, serve it seasonally, and yeah. The melon and the honeydew, almost always the thing that's left. At one of the properties, they've moved now to a diced fruit salad, and it serves better. They're able to enhance it with some additional like stone fruits and things, and that's been going really well for them. So at one property, these are actual photos here from the properties that we worked with over the last year. So when I was showing these photos of the fruit that I'd had from before this pilot, at one of the properties, this guy was like, yeah, but melon was cheap. And I said, well, congratulations, you didn't pay much for that trash. Right? Think about the mindset that says, well, it's okay that all that melon's on the plate because it was cheap. Yes, but it's trash. And it's heavy trash, which means you pay a lot to haul it away. So rethinking these things is a game changer. Salad dressing has become a running joke. I swear, I can't even count anymore how many photos I have like this. Just vats of salad dressing, even for small events. I mean, like a lot of times these are like 30 people or less with that amount of salad dressing. It's kind of crazy. Again, somebody grabs a vessel, someone pours the stuff in. Nobody's stopping to say like, okay, we got 30 people, half an ounce per person. I mean, that would end up being like this much salad dressing, right? Condiments, crazy, 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 crazy amounts of condiments, all condiments. The cheese and charcuterie board. So this one came up a lot not because they're not really good, they're really delicious, right? But they get messy real quick. And you have these situations where Like one cheese is really popular and then nothing else was eaten. So then they take the whole board back and replace the whole board with something fresh and new. So all that other stuff went to waste. It has an extremely high environmental footprint. You'll see a little bit more on that in a second. Very high food cost. And like I said, it gets messy quickly. And it's also like this mechanics of eating. So a lot of the banquet servers, they would be like, they put these big chunks of cheese and none of the guests want to be the first one to like cut into this thing, right? So you end up with these big chunks of cheese that go back to the kitchen because no one wanted to be the brave soul to like slice into this thing for the first time, right? The mechanics of eating. How am I supposed to pick up a blueberry with a silver tong that's 14 inches long? How am I supposed to pick up a blueberry with this, right? So blueberries left on the plate. Why would you have blueberries left on the plate? Because people can't get them, right? The mechanics of eating make a difference. Try individual smaller portions. This was at PCMA Convening Leaders back in January in Columbus. I love how they did this little mini charcuterie. It was perfect. Great way to do this. So emphasize the environmental footprint of things. This is a great example from one of the we did a few like full-fledged audits in this program, so you'll see something in a moment from one of those. But when you really emphasize the environmental footprint with things, it can just be a little bit more of an eye-opener. So as just sort of a reference point, 1 gallon of milk requires 144 gallons of water to make. So in this particular audit, 29 tables, 203 guests. The butter results, about 3 pounds of butter left over. Creamer results. It's kind of wow when you see it all poured together there like that, right? I mean, okay, we're going to come back to this in a minute. It's an all together, if I didn't have those photos on this screen, how many of you would be like, 140 ounces of cream, okay, whatever. Like, I don't even know what that means, right? 2 pounds of butter, 3 pounds of butter, okay, well, I can kind of understand that. I use butter in my house, right? But like 140 ounces of cream, I don't even know what that means, right? And 43 pounds of cheesecake. When I went into the pastry kitchen before this audit, I saw these cheesecakes. I was like, oh, there's a lot of that going to come back. That is a very large piece of cheesecake for a luncheon. So that's pretty impactful, isn't it? It's pretty impactful. It's pretty impactful to see those numbers, but even if I hadn't shown you any of the numbers, those photos tell quite a story, don't they? All right, so let's talk about audits and data. I'm going to fly past this for the sake of time. It's a little bit more technical, but what I want to talk about is the whole idea of audits and what you just saw. So when we do full-fledged audits, it means taking every single plate, scraping things into individual bins, pouring things into individual buckets, weighing everything, so you can imagine it is quite labor intensive. It takes a lot of space to do that. You really can't do it with very large events. I mean, can you imagine trying to do that with an event with like thousands of people? There's some newer technologies, some kitchen equipment, scales and stuff, great stuff. So if you have those technologies, you have the people, do the full audits. But I had been trying to get people to do food waste audits for years, to very little success. I mean, some of the properties I've worked with have been fantastic about it, really, really engaged in it and have learned a lot and done some really interesting things. But most of the properties, it's like, there's a variety of reasons and excuses. So what I thought of is I was like, well, wait a minute, let's start with the prolifically problematic items. Don't audit everything, just audit the one thing, the bread, the juice, the fruit, whatever the thing is that's most on your mind. Audit the one thing, audit it a few times, fix the problem, and move on, right? Because the problem is when we think of food waste audit, we have to audit everything, the entire menu, the entire ingredient list. That's a lot. Like, don't overwhelm people with that. Focus on one problem at a time. And start with, even if you have like the fancy kitchen scale technology stuff, start with a simple spreadsheet, because when you have to organize your data, it forces you to ask the question, what do I want to learn from this? What am I trying to achieve? And because of that, you will ask very specific questions. So we created a spreadsheet. It will be available. We'll put it somewhere for people to download. And we made it just we made it open so that you can edit it any way you want. You can add columns, you can delete stuff or whatever. But the main thing we wanted to do was we wanted to force it to be an audit that required multiple departments to work together. You have to have input from your sales and services team on what the event is, when the event is, how many people, the guarantees, all that stuff. You have to get some information from the executive chef on what's supposed to be prepared for this. Then you need actual information from the kitchen on what was prepared. Then you need banquets to be involved because they have a very specific role in how this feedback comes back. And ideally also stewarding. And so if you're trying to get all these people involved together, using the spreadsheet format, which is ideally supposed to bring everyone together, it didn't always work out that way, but that's kind of the starting point. And so the other thing was like, how do we make this easy enough for everybody to contribute? I mean, scales, how many people have access to scales? I mean, but I was like, you know what? The photos are so powerful. And if you look at a photo and you can tell, like, okay, it looks like 60% of the melon was there. Well, what if it was 53%? Who cares? You have no data right now. So even 60% is a piece of data that you didn't have before. So taking the photos and starting with an observation of photos was a really critical foundational piece of this whole pilot and what we asked the properties to do. Some more successfully than others because asking people to take photos is not always as straightforward as you might think. A lot of banquet workers, the captains especially that would be asked to do this, they've been in the industry a long time. They are older people that are not as comfortable with taking out their phones and taking photos of the food. Some are afraid of what their planners might think if they're taking photos at the end of an event, things like that. So yeah, it's tricky. So I've asked all the properties, think through the right process for your situation and enable your teams to be able to do this. Ideally, you'll do both of these. You'll do an occasional, you'll bring in maybe an external consultant. We worked with a local company here, Cascadia, wonderful, and have them do that work for you, but also training your internal people to be able to do these photo audits. So pictures speak 1,000 words and they may save you $1,000. When you take the after pictures of your events, everybody takes the before picture, right? Everything looks so beautiful, it's all displayed, it's so nice. But nobody takes the trash pictures at the end. You need the trash pictures at the end. And sometimes the photos will just be like, whoa, we've been looking at this all the time, but we never sat down and really talked about it. In one place, the granola, we were doing training, so they had the breakfast brought in. And they did the granola, and when we were kind of having this exercise and talking about all this stuff and talking about taking photos, the director of banquets, she looked over and she's like, this is pretty typical. Every time we do an event, we'll bring in about 25 yogurts and there might be 2 eaten. Every single time, this is what we do. Why do we do this? Why do we keep doing this? We all know, we've all seen it, right? But it's that moment to be able to have a conversation about it and really share it with others. So adding it to the post-event report, that way when you have planners that come back, when you go to the same venue over and over, get these photos so the next time you're planning your menu, you can be smarter about what it is that your attendees like to eat at that particular venue. Seeing waste and noticing it, again, you're more likely to fix it. And again, it's easier to say to the chef, I know that you say that this isn't a problem, but I'm looking at it right here, right? So again, not to make it a blame and shame game, but the photos don't lie. The photos tell you what's really happening, right? Again, this is one of those things where the chef said in the training, he's like, oh, my people know better. And then they roll this lunch in. It's just like, there you go. Before and after. How much salad dressing did we eat? Look at the before and after of that photo. How much salad did we eat? Look at the before and after of that photo. Right? Doesn't it speak volumes? It speaks volumes, right? In this case, I think the photo reveals, hey, we did pretty good actually. We got, the right size protein. It's not perfect, but that's actually about as close as you're going to get sometimes with food waste, but still having the photos revealing. This, not so good, right? Salads, look at the before and after of these salads, and these were delicious salads. I mean, I ate this at this buffet, right? It's really good, but just ridiculous amounts of food for the amount of people that we had in the room. One of the things that comes up over and over again is that the setup and recipes and everything for events Anything under 100 or especially under 50, it's pretty much the exact same thing. You feed a group of 50, whether you have 20, 40, 50, right? So this has been a big change immediately. And what I've heard a lot of the properties say is they are like, you know, I've heard 2 different properties say they want a wish list of like a room where they have all their vessels and everything organized. So it's like, if it's an event under 25, this is the stuff you use. If it's an event between 25 and 50, this is the stuff you use, which, I mean, those numbers work better for a hotel than a convention center, but you get the idea, being able to just make it easier so that even if you've got temporary or line level staff who haven't been trained on all this, they can see, this is the size of the event, this is the stuff I picked from, instead of these big old bowls and vats for salad dressing. Desserts, always, always, always so much dessert left over, so you can see the before and after photo. So, gee, gosh, the chocolate wasn't very popular. I mean, that seems a little shocking, but for whatever reason, the chocolate was the least popular of these things. And again, I don't have to count anything. I can see it in a photo, very quick. And again, photos must be informative, not punitive. I love this quote about the stewarding team. They were a little worried at first, like, why are they taking photos? Are we going to get in trouble? And now they get it. They get that the photos are part of the solution, that they can work less because they're having to scrape less waste off plates before they wash them, and that now they get the system, so it's all working, right? They get it because they've been involved in the conversations and they've been trained. Again, lunch day 1 on one of the events. This is after lunch. You can see like it's like it's barely been touched. And again, beautiful food, beautiful, beautiful food. Nothing wrong with this food. It's just too much. One of the things we talked about in a lot of these places is the idea of doing more like table service and switching more to plated for smaller. And actually, usually plated can get like kind of like a bad rap sometimes, but plated in these smaller events is a much better way to go because you can much better control the portion sizes and the presentation. In this case, the timestamp of the photo really made a difference because the person who was working the buffet, she saw somebody come, like one of the last people come to get to get food, and she's like, "Oh, wait, let me get something fresh for you." So she takes away everything here on the left, puts it on a cart, wheels it back, and comes out with these fresh, new, heaping, steaming, beautiful piles of food. She's doing the job she's been trained to do. She's been doing the job that she's always done. She's been doing the job of hospitality. Pleasing people, customer service, abundance, deliciousness, that's all her job. That's what hospitality is. So think about the mindset change that it takes to say to that person, probably wasn't a good idea to put out these new plates. That goes against everything she's been told this was a person who I know is older than me. So, I know she's probably been doing this a really long time, right? So it takes some time to reverse this, and you have to have a conversation so people understand, why are we doing things differently? So again, I asked people like kind of what's your wish list. Consistency came up a lot. And that people need to be able to be successful at this. They need to have cameras on their phones. They need to have phones that can hold a lot of pictures. They need to be able to, at one of the properties, they actually bought a digital camera for the banquets department because the whole phone thing wasn't working. So now there's one captain who's responsible for the digital camera, taking the photos, and then they can just, download those photos to a computer. So whatever it looks like, it just needs to happen. And then again, it's just about really fixing one problem at a time. The best way to get to that consistent practice is to not overwhelm people. Help them be successful in that one little change. Like the people who've done these changes, the people that I've talked to in these focus groups, they are so proud of this work. They're so pleased to see the difference they have made. And it just compels them to keep trying and keep doing more. So with that, please be sure to get in touch, and I can give you a link once the case studies are published. And hopefully the PCFWC, the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment, will continue investing in the West Coast. And we are trying to come up with, an idea for how we can be more helpful on the planner side of things. And we've done all this work on the supplier side. How do we help provide some SOPs or some templates or some checklists or something that can help the planner side so that really we're making these two pieces work together in harmony to reduce food waste. I can't believe that's a lot of content. Sorry I didn't leave a ton of time for questions, but anybody got questions?
Thank you. First of all, a round of applause for our presenter, Dr. Aurora Dawn Benton. All right, I have the microphone. Are there any questions? We do have up to 5 minutes, if that's all right with you. Any
I can do
questions?
this all day.
Any questions?
Hey, can I ask something real quick? Can I put you on the spot? Not you, the person behind you. Can I put Jen on the spot? So Jen was a really important part of this at the Fairmont Olympic. And I have to say that I was really impressed at how many of the sales and services directors at the different properties were the ones that really took this on, right? Like I said, normally it's the chef's job to do this, but it was really great to see the banquet directors and the services directors really say, like, this is so important. So I don't know if you want to share anything about your experience there.
Yeah, no, I think I was,
Can I get this?
sure. I think it actually began with our chef. Is that on? Sorry. It actually began with our chef, which was a huge piece for us because he started it and was really into it. And so that really helped us get that on board. Then it came to me and we started with some of the different focus groups and things like that. We have a lot of people on our team who are very passionate about sustainability, so that also helped. I think the biggest piece is one, consistency, but exactly what Aurora said is start with the small stuff. Like our photos, I was like joking, I was like, none of these are our photos yet. But then it came to the butter and that was ours, and the butter and the cream. And those were two things that when we realized and we saw it, because we were like, well, we're only filling those jars like a little bit and it looks cute. And then we saw how much truly came back. And that's when we started to, sort of look at different vessels and different things that we could change to make that a difference. And just on the call with Aurora, she said, instead of putting 2 creamers on all those little cute things that need 3 things, put 1. And so it was those little mindset changes. And our banquet staff has been really great too in learning that. And I think being in Seattle, it helps because we are very sustainability focused. And so our staff, our line level colleagues, everybody really is excited to be a part of it, but consistency is key.
Awesome.
Sure.
Thank you, Jen.
Yep.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. And you had a question? Tiffany?
Yes. Hi, great presentation.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. I'm more on the planning side where I would hire a caterer. Do you have any sort of best practices while maybe the provider side is learning some of
Yeah,
these practices, but as a client that I can help prevent that waste?
Yeah.
Like my biggest struggle is when I think we're gonna have 300.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, catering for 300, or do I say 275?
Yeah.
Especially for cost awareness as a nonprofit organization and preventing waste. Like, is there like a simple trick on that
Well,
count?
so first of all, there's never a simple trick when it comes to events because everything is so fluid, right? So I would say, first of all, across the board, when asked, every supplier will tell you one of the things that would help them the most is if they could get better numbers and earlier numbers from planners. It just is what it is, right? And I mean, I totally understand the dynamic you all are dealing with and trying to get, you're like, yeah, us too. Like, we like to have earlier numbers, better numbers. So I would say, if you've got this gap where you're like, okay, it could be anywhere from 240 to 320. That's kind of like a reasonable gap. Well, it's still a pretty big gap, right? So working with the caterer and asking them to first of all, just make sure you let them know that you want to have an open and transparent conversation about food waste, because one of the things that, when I talked earlier about dealing with the sales and services team, and when I talked to them about sustainability, they're like, oh, we're good, right? If your job is to sell food, you're going to talk about the stuff you're confident in, that you feel good about. You're not going to talk about things that you're like, I don't even know how to answer this. So have that as a conversation where you're basically just being honest and transparent and saying, like, look, I'm looking for some consultation on how we can work together so that at least if that gap is instead of 320, it's 240, how can we make sure those 80 meals go to a nonprofit organization locally? What's your plan for that? Do you have a local partner? Do you have an internal process? Can I see your SOP for how you handle donations? Because I'm telling you, with a lot of hotels, you need to ask for real. Like you need to really ask them to prove it, that they're doing it. Because a lot of them, unfortunately, are saying it and they're not necessarily doing it. Or they once had a program and they're not active anymore. And again, I'm not trying to disparage, any of those hotels. It's just that, sometimes you got to really ask people, well, show me, what was your last donation size? And I'd like to have a conversation with your local partner. Maybe I want to put it on my event website or social media. So I think it's really about having that conversation and recognizing that, listen, because I can't get you the numbers that I need to be able to get you, this is the risk we have of having waste. Now let's talk about what's the best thing what is there anything we can do to prevent that? Because some of that is just we're going to have to cook the food and hope for the best. But what can we do to prevent that? Are there things that you can come up with together that would reduce that? The other thing is to look at your total menu and how much food do you really think people can eat at one time, right? Depends on what kind of group you're dealing with and what their demographics are. But why do we keep ordering pastries and breads and bagels and all these things that the trends tell us, the data tells us people aren't eating like that anymore. So why do you still order like that, right? I'm sorry, I'm not picking on you personally, but you know what I mean? So I think it's looking at some of those choices and thinking, and just again, having maybe that honest conversation with the supplier, because we're all still kind of learning, right? What is the magic thing? What is the best practice? But hopefully that helps a little bit. Okay.
We just have one last question here, and then for anyone else, of course, her information is up there, and this is for Anne.
Thank you. So as a property in development that will be a small retreat center, I'd love to know some best practices to start right from the beginning, rather than having to do redesign, and also to engage guests.
So my guess is probably you're going to have the kind of price point that would allow you to do some fun and creative things. I will say that I loved this project, the fact that I got to work with several Fairmont properties. Working with a luxury property is a different kind of conversation than working with a convention center who might be doing a show for 10,000 people or something. And I love solving all the problems and working with all of the in between. But one of the things that I've been really focusing on this is the quality over quantity. Right? And if you're a small retreat center and you're trying to be sustainability forward, you can really shift more into buying local ingredients, sourcing, really doing that sourcing local piece. You can replace food with experiences and other upgrades that will matter and that you're able to offer under that one roof. And so if you're dealing with somebody who says okay, one of my favorite quotes from this whole event came from Jen. When we were talking about the fact, she's like, planners do the breakfast and the AM lunch and the lunch and the AM break and the lunch and the PM break. It's if you have to sit here in this meeting all day, you're just going to feed us till we can't move, right? I think that's hilarious because it's so true, right? So we started having a really good creative conversation around what are some things that they can offer for that AM break that isn't food, but gets people out of their seats, gets them talking, gets them engaged. We started talking about CSR activities, wellness activities, things like that. So there's a lot of things, ask yourself, do I need food at all the places where I've planned food? Is there something else that will help me accomplish my goals that isn't food? Now, if you're a caterer, that's not really what you want to hear because your job is to sell food. If you're a hotel or a conference center, that's great because you can offer all of it, right? You can rent the tables, the people, everything, you get to get revenue off of all of that. So I would say just think creatively about how you can help planners meet their objectives. Meetings have goals. It's not just put calories in people. There are objectives that people have for a meeting that they're planning. How can food be a supporter of that? How can we serve food that's more brain friendly? I mean, this gets out of the food waste realm, but thinking about how food can be used to serve the strategic purpose of a meeting. So hopefully that helps, yeah. And I think also just the menu development. We didn't have a chance to get into it. I know a lot of times people will ask questions about special meals and dietary restrictions. That comes up a lot because it is also quite a source of food waste. And so just thinking about menu development, that's another thing, planners, by the way, an easy low-hanging fruit is better manage your dietary restriction and dietary preferences information with your attendees. Better data like that, because a great example is at one of the properties, they were talking about the fact that, the challenge is if we've been told there's 5 vegetarians And then we make, then we go out and we present the menu, and the menu is like, oh, there's this like chicken dish, and then there's pumpkin ravioli. Well, once people see the menu, all of a sudden everybody's a vegetarian. They want the pumpkin ravioli. We didn't make enough pumpkin ravioli, so now the kitchen's scrambling. We got all this chicken that's gonna go to waste. So really that planning around the dietary preferences is gonna be critical. But yeah, I think when you're doing your menu planning from the very beginning, just thinking about that streamlining, because the more choice you give, and it's hard. I can imagine how hard that is for a chef. Like, oh, I want to offer all these great things, which is why a lot of times, almost every property that I worked with, I asked them, how often do you do meals off of your standard menu versus custom menu? And when we started this project, I don't know if that's changed because a lot of them were kind of using old menus and stuff, but most of them said we do more custom menu than standard menu. So that's another thing. If you're asking for a custom menu, really, do you have to ask for a custom menu? Because an untested menu is more likely to lead to waste because the team doesn't know the menu yet, the staff doesn't really know that recipe yet, the banquets team doesn't really know the setup for that. It's very easy for a lot of waste to happen on an untested menu. And so if you're always looking for that custom menu, maybe there's little ways to customize within a standard menu so that, again, I think that probably helps to eliminate some waste as well.
Thank you,
All right.
Dr. Aurora Dawn Benton, for
Thanks.
such a passionate presentation.